Happy Mother's Day. Thank you for who you are, the work that you put in to building your families, your labor of love for the kingdom and God's church, for the lives that you live, the integrity of your character, the witness that you are. We are truly blessed to have you as part of our church family. How you enrich us and bless us. And we thank God for every one of you. You are precious and loved. And we're so grateful for each one of you. We have as a token of our appreciation these wonderful coffee mugs. Many of them have some type of scripture verse or reference on them and a little bit of hand sanitizer. Please come and take one after church this morning. If you come up here and there are none left, don't despair. We still have some in boxes that we just haven't taken out. There should be plenty for each of you. And thank you. I hope this is a special day for you. Thank you for the joy and blessing you bring to our lives. We're going to detour out of Matthew today. We're going to look at the book of Ruth, chapter 3, in keeping with Mother's Day. And while you're turning, I want to share with you this 54-page report. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to give you some highlights. It is the ministry summary of Samaritan's Purse. I'm just giving you some highlights. During the pandemic last year, they established field hospitals, fully equipped hospitals in New York City, in Nassau of the Bahamas, and the town of Cremona, Italy. They established medical teams in Alaska and Arizona. They trained over 878,000 people about preventive measures that they could take to avoid the virus. They provided over 480,000 sets of protective supplies. They prepared over 28,000 food baskets, and they were able to present the gospel to over 120,000 people. They went to Honduras and provided relief during the hurricane. They went to the country of Lebanon when they had that massive explosion in the city of Beirut. The impact of that was felt for 150 miles, and over 300,000 people were left homeless. They were there. There was an Armenia refugee crisis as they were at war with one of the countries that used to be part of the Soviet Union. They showed up there. They also showed up on our own Gulf Coast with Hurricane Laura. With Operation Christmas Child, 9.1 million boxes were delivered. Over 1 million children made decisions for Christ. And I found this one very interesting. There were over 1 million decisions for Christ, but yet there were over 3 million children that took the discipleship training. That's really cool. They sent supplies to 16 hospitals in 12 countries. They have, and I did not know this, they have a Children's Heart Project. And since 1997, they have provided more than 1,400 procedures for kids that are born with congenital heart defects in countries like Mongolia, Uganda, and Bolivia. The total expenses, the total money spent in their ministry last year was $677 million. And less than 7% went to administrative expenses. You would have to go far and wide to find a charitable organization that's leaner and operates on a thinner budget. The only one that I can think of is the Marine Corps Foundation, that foundation that's set up for widows and orphans for Marines that are killed in combat. That's the only charitable organization that I know that has a lower administrative expenses. It's exciting to be a part of that through our local church and the Operation Christmas Child, and also the United Brethren Church, because our global ministries partners with Samaritan's Purse. So I just thought that would be interesting to know what has been happening in the broader picture. This sermon isn't really, I guess, what you would call a Mother's Day sermon in the classic sense, But I felt led to share it with you because, well, one, I like the story. I really do. I like the people who are mentioned here, their character, who they are as people. And I love looking at how God works in their lives and the things that He does for them. And I guess it ties into Mother's Day in that we're looking at the life of the great-great-grandmother and the great-grandmother and the great-great-grandmother of King David. So I guess it has that tie-in, but I want to share it with you. Ruth chapter 3, beginning with verse 1. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to Ruth, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative with whose young women you were? See, he's winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash therefore and anoint yourself and put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." And she replied, all that you say, I will do." When we come to chapter 3, about 3 months have passed since the beginning of the book of Ruth. The barley harvest has ended. The wheat harvest is about to begin. We can assume that for Naomi and Ruth, their daily needs are being met. And Ruth knows who Boaz is, and of course Naomi does, but there doesn't seem to be anything developing in their relationship. It simply appears that whatever's happening between the two of them, there's nothing happening between the two of them, and life just simply goes on. Isn't that how we find ourselves sometimes? We find ourselves in a place in life where we really want something to happen. We really need something to happen. And life continues to go on, and we're kind of stuck in this place, and God appears to be keeping us waiting. And waiting is difficult, even in good times. And I think even especially now, where everything is just instant for us. I mean, we can just get on our phones and just make a few clicks, and through the internet it can take us to another part of the world in an instant. Difficult for us to wait. But how well we do during these times when our lives appear to be on hold and God appears to be silent, how well we do will be determined by our perspective, which brings us to the central theme of this book. We have a God, we have an active God who continually works in the lives of His people. Sometimes it appears that God disappears, and we think He's forgotten about us in our daily routine with its pressures and its hassles and uncertainties. But that is not the case. I like what one preacher said, and I can't even remember who it was. It was a long time ago, but it made an impression on me. He said, when it seems like nothing's happening, something's happening. You know, if we pull back the curtain of our life to look behind the scenes, we will not find an empty void. We will find the God who works all things according to the counsel of His will, Ephesians 1:11 tells us. So in this chapter, we see how God moves and how they respond to His working in their lives. And the first one I would share with you is Naomi. Naomi follows God. Now, in order to understand what I shared with you in the first 5 verses, we need a little bit of background. Beginning with God's call to Abraham, the land of promise, the nation of Israel, has always been a key element to that promise. That would be the place where Abraham and his descendants could live and enjoy the blessings of God. The book of Exodus is the story of their deliverance from Egyptian bondage and their journey to the promised land. By the time we come to the book of Deuteronomy, they are on the cusp of receiving that promise. They're on the eastern side of the Jordan River. And it's here, before they cross over, that these promises are reaffirmed. And God reestablishes his covenant and restates his promises concerning that land. Now, after they go into Canaan and they conquer it under Joshua's leadership, the land is parceled out according to tribes, clans, and families. Each parcel that was handed out was part of their inheritance from God. However, they did not have absolute ownership or rights to the land. It still belonged to God, and it was his gift to them. However, in the case of disaster or poverty, the value of the land could be realized in order to alleviate suffering. So if I was in a hard place, I could sell my land to Darren and Mel. And if my fortunes changed, then I had the right to go back and buy that land back from them. Well, maybe my situation got better, but I didn't have what it took to buy that property back. Well, then I could go to a relative. I could call up, Mama T, will you buy that for me? And so if she was a responsible relative and she had the means, she was expected that she would buy that back. But if she did not have the means to buy it, then in the year of Jubilee, which came along every 50th year, that land would pass back from Darren and Mel back to my family without compensation. So that's the setting of this story. Naomi was married to a man named Elimelech. He uprooted his family and took them to the country of Moab. It took her and the two sons. While they were there, the two sons married, all three men died. So Naomi was left with nothing. So she comes back, she sells the land, but she's looking for a relative, and she settles on Boaz. Her hope is that Boaz will buy the land and ensure her security, and then turn around and marry Ruth, and thereby establish her security. Now, the kinsman redeemers, what they were called, that relative could set aside those rights and say, no, I'm not interested. But if they did that, they would be subject to public scorn and shame. This is the potential that Naomi sees. It appears that this is the way that God is leading. They come back to Israel, they have nothing. And here is this relative, Boaz, who is successful, has his own farming business, has workers. Perhaps this is the answer, that Boaz can buy back that property, that Boaz can marry Ruth. It looks like it's all going to line up. She's praying it's going to happen. But will it? Because there is yet another kinsman in line ahead of Boaz. But Boaz is Naomi's choice for Ruth. How is this going to work out? These women have no ability to manipulate their circumstances. They have no ability to orchestrate their situation. They have no choice but to place their lives in the hands of God. And ultimately, that's how you and I must also live. This is affirmed in the New Testament in Romans 8:28. We know that all things work together for good to those who love God. But what is our good? You know, some of those things that work out to our good, those are real hard places we have to travel. For Naomi, she perceived that good thing to be the redemption of her property and to see Ruth remarried. For you and me, it can be a variety of different other things, but in the fullest sense, in the truest sense, the greatest good for you and me, regardless of our situation in life, the greatest good is for us to know Jesus Christ and to be members of his family. It is to allow the Holy Spirit to work in our lives and conform us to the image of Christ. And it's to fulfill the destiny for which you and I have been created. To know God, to love Him, and enjoy Him. And as we enjoy our relationship with God, and as we enjoy this life that we are living, we realize and understand that it's a preparation for the life to come. And what I love about this is that God can even use the failings of other people to bring about a good end. We don't know really why Elimelech left. I know there were some hard times there, but was it because he panicked and thought, well, there's food and prosperity over in Moab, let's go there, I can't make it here? Did he weigh all the facts and try to make the best decision that he could and it just blew up in his face? I've been there a few times. Or was it outright rebellion and stubbornness and said, I don't care what God has said in the past. I have this need now and I'm going to meet it. We don't know why he went, but they did. And while they were there, Mahlon, who married Ruth, and his brother, who married another woman, they essentially sinned. Jews were forbidden to marry Gentiles because the risk was so great that the Gentile would lead them into false religion. So Elimelech at best made a wrong decision. And Mahlon at best flat out disobeyed God. Now sin is never right. And we're not to engage in a lifestyle that we continue in sin, so God gives us His grace. What did Paul say? Where sin abounded, grace did much more abound. Should we continue in sin that God's grace will continue to abound? God forbid. But here's what I'm saying. This story illustrates that we don't have to give up on the future because of what has happened in the past, or because of what's going on right now in our present. Jesus Christ is our kinsman redeemer. And no matter what has happened in the past, no matter what we face today, we can move forward into the future with Him. Amen. Naomi follows. Let's follow her example. And what I like is that Naomi doesn't just passively sit back and say, well, whatever, and call that faith. That's just a mask for a false faith. That's an excuse for laziness or fatalism. She sees how it appears that God is lining things up, and she takes action, and she puts together a plan, and she trusts God to lead her and Ruth into the future. Then I see Ruth, and Ruth trusts God. Ruth has an act of faith. She accepts Naomi's plan, and she puts it into action. Now there's some risk here. Here's a single woman in a barn full of men in good spirits after they've celebrated the harvest. That leaves her vulnerable in terms of her safety. It leaves her vulnerable in terms of her reputation. You know, how are other people going to interpret that? I'm sure people are going to find out that she was there. What are people going to say about that? But even with the risk, even with the vulnerability, she places her trust in God's care and protection on the basis of what He has done in the past. So must you and I. Just as God provided for them when they came back from Moab, got her a job, got her a good job, provided for their daily needs, she could look back and say, well, if God has done this, this, and this, I can trust Him with that. Each of us can look back and see the hand of God in our lives, and on that basis, His faithfulness, His love, His care, you and I can trust Him for the present and for the future. Now in verse 9, Ruth uses the word wing. What that is, that's a direct appeal to Boaz to marry her. She's proposing to him. There are times that no matter what we may feel or experience, we just have to stand on the bare naked promises of God. Nothing else. It may not make sense. We may not be able to see how it's going to work out. But we just have to trust that He is who He says He is, and that what He has done, He will continue to do. We trust God, we commit our situation to Him, and then we take action on the basis of His Word. If our lives are in right relationship with Him, if we are seeking His will, then He will bless us. He will redeem our situation even when we fall short. Let's trust Him. And then finally I see Boaz. Boaz reflects God. We see Boaz reflecting God's compassion. He understood Ruth's heart and motivation. He not only understood her meaning, but he accepts her proposal. He blesses her for it. He does not reject her in her time of need. I think, I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble here focusing. What appears to be happening is that while God is prompting Naomi, He's also preparing Boaz. In that section of Scripture that we did not read, verses 10 through 18, He calls her a worthy woman. He noticed her out in the field. You know, she was attractive. She caught his eye even though he didn't let on. But he was checking her out. He saw her work ethic. He saw how she worked not only for herself, but to take care of her mother-in-law. He saw how she handled herself around other people. God was laying the groundwork, painting a favorable impression in Boaz's mind about this woman named Ruth. You know, sometimes we really want God to do something for us in our life, or we really need Him to do something, and we feel like it's almost in our grasp, and then it's snatched away, and we wonder, why? Why is nothing happening? This is agonizing here. What we have to remember is that God sometimes, He wants to bring us from here to there, but He needs to prepare us for the journey. And He needs to prepare the destination for our arrival. If I can get a little personal here. I came here in January of 2003. I was pastoring another church 10 years earlier, and I was offered this. And they asked me if I would come here. Now, I had preached some revivals here in the late 80s and the early 90s. I loved preaching here. That was a no-brainer. I said yes, and then I told Cheryl, I didn't ask her, I said, we're going to Salem. And we were excited. And 2 weeks later, superintendent called me back and said, I'm sorry, but you're not going to go. See, you'd had a pastor who had some struggles and who resigned. But then he asked to be reinstated, and you took him in. Now, to say that I was disappointed that I could not come here, that would be an understatement. But it was necessary. It was necessary for that pastor because you loved him, and you worked with him, and you restored him so that he has a fabulous ministry in another state today. And had it not been for your love and your restoration and your help, maybe this is his last church and maybe his ministry is over. But God also needed to do a work in my life, because about 3 years later, I burnt out. I was sick. I left the pastorate and we settled at Lancaster Church, and I told Cheryl, I'm just going to work a job. I'm just going to do pulpit supply for at least the next 6 years. We'll get Andrew through high school, and then we'll see what God has for us next. Well, after about 6 months of that, they asked me to come on board, and I worked as youth minister there. But during those 8 years, I fell in love with my calling once again. And during those 8 years, I began to look at life and ministry and how to do it differently than I had before. The way I minister here is completely different than what I did prior to coming here. And it was safe with youth because, you just teach them about Jesus and let them have fun. You can do anything with them. And then 10 years later, God did a transformation so that when I came here, I was built to last for the long haul. In 96, when I burned out, that was the second time I'd done it. And so he had to work with me. If I had come here in 92 or 93, maybe I would have washed out of the ministry too. See, he had to prepare me. I wanted to be here. But he had to get me ready to make the trip. He also had someone else in whose life he had to work. And so sometimes when it looks like God is not doing anything, and sometimes it looks like our life is just going nowhere, he is in fact working behind the scenes, setting the stage, working your heart to prepare you for the trip and preparing the destination for your arrival. And then look at verse 12. As he talks with Ruth. I like this about his character. He wants to do the right thing. He wants to do it the right way. He wants to do it in accordance to the instruction of God's word. And finally, Boaz shows God's character in loading Ruth down with a great amount of barley, all that she can take. It gives him he gives her an abundant and gracious provision. Boaz is a picture of our kinsman redeemer, Jesus Christ. He became one with us in every single way except one. He had no sin. He died the death we deserved to die, and he redeemed us by his blood. He offers us an unconditional love. He calms our fears. He offers his help, and he meets our needs. The question is, how much are we like Boaz? How much do we reflect Jesus in us? We see clearly the character of God reflected in the actions and words of Boaz. What does the world see when it sees us? Does it see God, or does it see something less? Let's follow the example of these two women. Naomi, as she follows God, Ruth, as she trusts God, and also Boaz, as he reflects God. In closing, I want to share a poem with you written by a woman by the name of Anna L. Waring. It was written sometime around 1830. Wherever he may guide me, no want shall turn me back. My shepherd is beside me, and nothing can I lack. His wisdom ever waketh, his sight is never dim. He knows the way he taketh, and I will follow him. Good words, good words. Let's stand.